This is the President Wilson Hotel in Geneva, Switzerland. And outside of it, dozens of Swiss policemen are getting ready to arrest someone. But the person they are about to put in handcuffs is not your typical tourist. Instead, he is the son of one of the most notorious dictators in the world. The police is about to arrest the son of Muammar Gaddafi.
For over 40 years, the Libyan ruler terrifies and torments the world.
The vast majority of the wealth of the country was siphoned away into the pockets of the Gaddafi regime, his sons.
This mad dog of the Middle East has a goal of a world revolution.
And even though the policemen know this isn't an ordinary arrest, there is no way they can predict the insane chain of events that will be set off by this, causing a conflict that would lead to economic warfare, travel bans, a hostage crisis, and ultimately Gaddafi trying to dissolve Switzerland and divide it up among its neighboring countries. This is the story of Gaddafi versus Switzerland. Let's back up for a moment to understand how we even got here. It all started with a phone call to the Swiss police in July of 2008. The call comes from a maid working at the President Wilson Hotel. Located right on the shores of Lake Geneva, it is one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. Its royal penthouse suite is even considered the most expensive hotel room on the planet. And because of its location near the United Nations building, this hotel often hosts international diplomats and heads of state. The maid tells the police that she called because someone in distress approached her in the hotel hallway. This real hotel surveillance footage shows that moment. The woman in distress claims that she is working for some very special hotel guests, Hannibal Gaddafi and his wife, Erin Scaf, the son and daughter-in-law of Muammar Gaddafi, who has ruled Libya for nearly 40 years at this point. Gaddafi is a brutal dictator known for crushing dissent at home and treating Libya like his personal empire. His children frequently live it up in Europe. Erin is currently 8 months pregnant, and the couple had traveled to Geneva in anticipation of the birth of their child, bringing along with them many servants to tend to their needs. With all the servants and bodyguards, the Gaddafis had booked out a total of 10 rooms at the hotel. The surveillance footage shows the corridor leading to these rooms, where a makeshift table has been set up with Libyan guards ensuring that no unauthorized people can get access to the dictator's son. The woman asking for help describes to the hotel maid that she, as well as one other employee of the Gaddafis, have been brutally beaten by the Gaddafi couple. So, after receiving the phone call from the maid, Swiss police entered the hotel and they talked to the two employees that claimed to have been beaten. They then take them both to the station, and there, the full extent of the abuse becomes clear, as their many injuries are documented. The two servants had clearly been severely abused, and they feared that they might even get killed once the couple returns with them to Libya. And so based on this evidence, the Swiss police make the decision to arrest Hannibal and Erin. But this will not just be a simple arrest. The police try to negotiate with a delegate of the Gaddafis to convince Hannibal and Erin to come to the police station voluntarily. But this doesn't work. And after hours of talks, the Geneva police decide it's time for action, leading to this scene from the beginning of the video, with Swiss police officers ready to enter the hotel. Soon, 24 police officers make it to the floor with the Gaddafi suite. But here, they hit a problem. Several bodyguards are stationed outside the door, and they are determined to prevent the police from entering. The police officers try to argue and convince the Libyan bodyguards to give up, but the bodyguards are not willing to cooperate. And so, a clash breaks out, with police officers actively fighting the bodyguards of the Libyan ruling family. After several tense moments of resistance, the bodyguards are finally restrained, and 2 of them are arrested. Finally, the way is now clear to enter the Gaddafi suite, and Hannibal and Erin now surrender and allow themselves to be taken into custody. They are discreetly taken out a back door and drive away in unmarked cars in order to protect their privacy. Hannibal is taken to the police station, and because Aline is so far along in her pregnancy, she is taken to a hospital. It is a very delicate situation. Normally, visiting dignitaries of foreign nations would have diplomatic immunity, and they cannot be arrested. But this doesn't apply if the charges are criminal and outside of the scope of political interest, like in this case with assault. And besides being the son of the Libyan leader, Hannibal did not have diplomatic status in Switzerland at the time, and so Swiss officials decide to move forward with the assault charges. Hannibal is treated just as any other person charged with a crime, and once brought to jail, he has his mugshot taken. While the couple is held for 2 days, their attorney is working for any solution to try to get them out. He tries arguing with the courts that the couple should at least be allowed out on bail, and promises that the Gaddafis pose no flight risk. And surprisingly, it works. The couple is released on bail for roughly $500,000. It is an absurdly high amount, but for the very wealthy Gaddafi family, it is obviously not a problem. Hannibal and Aline walk free, out on bail. And I don't really see how this comes to a surprise to anyone, but their first stop is immediately to the airport. Their bail has no travel restrictions, and so the couple board the first flight straight back to Libya. They have successfully evaded prosecution. Once home, the Gaddafis reach an undisclosed financial settlement with the two servants, who then agree to drop all charges against Hannibal and Aline. Now, normally you would think that this would be the end of the story, a bizarre international incident in which the Gaddafis, of course, got away with it. But actually, this is just the beginning, because this incident has made someone else really mad. Muammar Gaddafi is outraged once he hears about the situation, especially because Hannibal claims that he was mistreated by the police during the arrest, including at one point having a bag placed over his head, and the Libyan leader now wants revenge. Gaddafi demands to know the names of the arresting officers, but Swiss authorities deny his request. And so, he decides on a scorched earth policy with Switzerland, severing any ties until he gets those names and an apology to his son. He prohibits Swiss companies from doing business in Libya and closes offices of several large companies. He also cancels international flights. Back then, Swiss international airlines used to fly to Libya's capital Tripoli 3 times a week, but on Gaddafi's order, those flights are first reduced to just 1 per week and then completely prohibited. And in an unprecedented move, Libya, a major supplier of oil to many European countries, completely cuts off crude oil exports to Switzerland. At the time, Libya accounted for roughly 30% of all Swiss oil imports, 2 million metric tons a year, which Switzerland now has to substitute from other places. Gaddafi is clearly trying to do whatever he can to hurt Switzerland. At one point, he even withdraws $5 billion in assets from his Swiss bank accounts. $5 billion! Just for context, the entire GDP of Libya in that same year was $60 billion. And it is now when Gaddafi also appeals to other nations. In July of 2009, the G8 summit was held in Italy, with Libya invited as a guest nation. And while the other countries were discussing major issues like climate change and energy policy, Gaddafi was trying to convince fellow world leaders to support his personal vendetta against Switzerland. His proposal was extraordinary. Switzerland should be dissolved entirely, with the French-speaking regions handed to France, the German-speaking regions to Germany, and the Italian-speaking ones to Italy. The idea is quietly ignored. And so, he submits his infamous proposal again, this time to the United Nations, where it is quickly dismissed as the UN Charter prohibits nations from threatening the existence of other countries. And after achieving little on the international stage, Gaddafi has one different idea. Up to this point, the fallout had been mere geopolitical, disruptive, sometimes costly, but abstract. But what followed now was different, as two Swiss citizens, completely unrelated to the dispute, got pulled into the conflict. This is Max Goldie, and this is Rashid Hamdani. They both hold Swiss citizenship, and they work for the company ABB. Now, ABB is one of those Swiss companies that was forced to end its operations in Libya following the arrest of Hannibal. Goldie and Hamdani are arrested, and they are charged with illegal residency and illegal economic activity, even though when they entered the country, none of this was in place. Just before he's taken to prison, Goldie manages to briefly call the Swiss embassy for advice because he knows he hasn't committed any crime. But there is little any ambassador can do for the two men. The Libyan officers are officials of the government, and there is no grounds for Goldie and Hamdani to resist being arrested. And so, the two men are taken to prison, where they are held with no idea what is coming next. After 10 days with no additional information, they are finally allowed out on bail, but the condition of their bail prohibit them from leaving the country. Their passports are confiscated, and they remain stuck in Libya while their charges are pending. Meanwhile, back in Switzerland, Swiss authorities are aware of the arrested men and begin work immediately to bring them back home. Ambassadors try negotiating with Libyan officials, but they make little progress. Also, because Gaddafi denies that these arrests are in retaliation for his son being arrested. And with diplomacy failing, Swiss authorities begin to turn to an extraordinary new approach, using special forces to smuggle the two men out of Libya. And the plan is to go like this. South of the city of Tripoli, there is a compound of buildings that belongs to the Swedish telecommunications company Ericsson. And on their property, there is a large swimming pool as well as a tennis court. The plan is that Goldie and Hamdani will visit that building. Their cover will be that they are simply going there to relax and use the pool. And so, the men make it a habit to frequently drive from the Swiss embassy all the way to that swimming pool compound, spend the day there, and then head back to the embassy. This way, the Libyan officials secretly shadowing them will become used to that movement, and hopefully they will pay less attention. Now, the plan is that on one random day, instead of heading to the pool, there will be a driver waiting for them, so they can secretly sneak into an escape car. And this car will then take them through the desert and across the border, leaving the country. But this plan has its weaknesses. For one, even if they make it to Egypt, Algeria, or Tunisia, all those countries at the time had good ties with Libya and were very likely to simply send the men straight back. And so, eventually, the plan gets scrapped. But a new plan is drawn up by Swiss intelligence, this one even more adventurous. Instead of going to a swimming pool, Goldie and Hamdani would be provided with jet skis. Then, in the middle of the night, they could head to the beach and take their jet skis out to the Mediterranean Sea. Once they are out on the water, they would just keep going towards the horizon for exactly 12 nautical miles. Because at 12 nautical miles, the territorial waters of Libya end. Here, special forces with boats will be waiting for them and pick them up off the jet skis. From here on, they can safely head towards Italy. But as fascinating as all of these escape plans are, none of them ever receives the green light, most likely because they are deemed too risky. And instead, Swiss authorities once again turn to diplomacy, reopening negotiations with the dictator. By this point, it had been over a year since Hamdani and Goldie were arrested, and in an unprecedented move, the president of Switzerland, Hans-Rudolf Merz, decides to travel to Tripoli himself in order to broker their release and restore normal relations between the two countries. Merz knows that bowing to a dictator will be an unpopular move, but he is still determined to try for the sake of getting Hamdani and Goldie home. Even still, he's careful with his words. Gaddafi wants an apology for the arrest of his son, and Merz decides to finally give him one and publicly agrees that the arrest of the dictator's son was unnecessary. And the Swiss president decides to go even another step farther. Merz knows that Gaddafi wants the names of the officers who arrested his son. Merz also knows that he can't really give up those names, but he does promise to at least establish an independent tribunal that will investigate if Hannibal was mistreated during his arrest. And it is starting to look better, as in return to these concessions, the Libyan Prime Minister promises that Gaddafi and Hamdani will be allowed to leave Libya within a few weeks. It is the best that Merz seems to be able to get from the Libyan officials, and so he returns home. Though instead of applause for arranging the hostages' release, he returns to scorn and criticism over the apology, with many claiming that it will do little good. And those that are doubting seem to have a point, especially once a new wrinkle appears in the already troubled Swiss-Libyan relations. Tribune de Genève, a newspaper based in Geneva, leaks the mugshot that was taken of Hannibal Gaddafi after his arrest. This is a new step of humiliation for Hannibal and the Gaddafi family as a whole. The Gaddafis immediately file a civil suit against the newspaper, seeking the equivalent of $90,000 in damages. And a Swiss court does rule that Hannibal's privacy was indeed violated by the leaked photos, but it denies awarding the Gaddafis any monetary compensation. But if the arrest of Gaddafi and Hamdani is not retaliation for Hannibal's ongoing situation, this new development should not affect the upcoming release of the two men. And at first, it does seem that everything is still on track. Just 3 days before they are to board a plane for Switzerland, Gaddafi and Hamdani are sent to a Libyan doctor for a final checkup to make sure they are in good health. But once they go into the hospital, they never come back out. Gaddafi and Hamdani have simply vanished. Fearing the worst, Swiss diplomats begin searching everywhere for the two men, not knowing if they are even still alive. Weeks pass, and Libyan officials eventually declare that Gaddafi and Hamdani are held at a secure location. Secure from what, Swiss officials don't know, but at least it seems to be confirmation that the men are still alive. And it is at this point when the Swiss strategy seems to change. Instead of cozying up to the Gaddafis and trying to find some compromise in negotiations, Switzerland decides to put pressure on Libyan officials in a way that they know will hurt. They begin to deny issuing visas to top Libyan officials for the Schengen zone, including to the Gaddafi family. As part of the Schengen Agreement, if one country that is part of this agreement has blacklisted anyone from entering, all countries must comply. And this effectively bars the entire Gaddafi family from entering nearly all of Europe. Just days after this announcement, out of nowhere, a car pulls up to the Swiss embassy in Tripoli, and out tumble none other than Gaddafi and Hamdani, released from wherever they were held for 7 weeks. Though Libyan officials had denied they were being held captive, the men would later report that they had been held in solitary confinement in prison cells, with no information provided to them as to what was going on. With the two men safely secured inside the embassy, they are now confined within the building for fear that should they leave, they could be kidnapped again. It is totally unclear how they can safely get back to Switzerland. Gaddafi and Hamdani are in safety, but the relations between Libya and Europe are now at their absolute lowest. Gaddafi announces that Libya will impose its own travel ban, declining to issue visas for any EU citizens to Libya. And now suddenly, the European Union is involved in the conflict, whether it wants to be or not. Many countries are outraged, especially countries like Italy, which have a large economic interest in being on good terms with Libya. With pressure from the EU mounting, Switzerland agrees to lift the Schengen travel ban, and in return, Libya also agrees to lift its own ban on EU citizens. But Libya still refuses to allow Goldie and Hamdani to return to Switzerland. Instead, the two men must now finally face trial for their charges. Still confined to the Swiss embassy, Goldie and Hamdani do not appear in court when the Libyan judge returns their convictions. The verdict: both men are to serve 16-month prison sentences for their alleged visa and business activity crimes. Goldie and Hamdani refuse to leave the embassy to report to prison, and their lawyers work to appeal their conviction. And amazingly, it works to a degree. Hamdani has his sentence vacated completely, and Goldie has his sentence reduced from 16 months to 4, along with an imposed fine. Still, he is not willing to serve his sentence in a Libyan prison, and the situation heats up once again. Libyan officials demand that Goldie surrenders himself to serve his sentence. And to add even more pressure to the situation, the Libyan police begin surrounding the embassy, threatening to break in and storm the building if Goldie doesn't surrender. In preparation for a possible attack, Swiss diplomats begin burning all confidential documents so that they cannot be stolen, and they turn to Swiss authorities back home for advice on what to do, and are told that the decision remains with them. And so, Goldie makes a difficult and painful decision. Seeing no other way out, he decides to step outside the building and allow Libyan authorities to arrest him and take him to jail, hoping that just serving his 4-month sentence, he may finally be allowed to return home after all. With Goldie secured with the Libyans, Hamdani can now examine his own situation. And since his charges have been cleared, he is finally allowed to leave Libya, but with one final stipulation. He must read a pre-written statement condemning Switzerland for how they handled the situation, forcing him to be imprisoned in their embassy and praising the Libyans for taking care of him. It is a price Hamdani is willing to pay to finally be allowed to leave. And after making this statement, Hamdani is whisked away by car and driven to neighboring Tunisia with no issue. Hamdani is finally free. Goldie, on the other hand, has been taken to a Libyan prison, where he begins his 4-month sentence. And this is where, in a truly bizarre twist, things came full circle, as one day during his time in prison, Goldie is suddenly summoned to briefly leave his cell. That is, because someone would like to speak with him, and that somebody is none other than Hannibal Gaddafi himself. The man whose arrest in Switzerland has caused this whole drama to begin with now wants to meet Max Goldie. In a televised interview, Hannibal speaks with Goldie, and he allows Goldie to call his mother to wish her a happy birthday. In return, Goldie expresses sympathy to Hannibal for his arrest back in Switzerland. Though Hannibal gets the theatrical show of an apology for his arrest from Goldie, it doesn't sway him to grant Goldie an early release. Goldie returns to his cell, serving out the rest of his 4-month sentence. As the end of the 4 months is approaching, Swiss diplomats travel to Tripoli to ensure that Goldie will be released. And after almost 2 years since it all began, Goldie can finally return home. And as Goldie steps off the plane in Switzerland, welcomed home by his family and the diplomats that fought so hard to get him back, he vows to never again return to Libya. Now, all of this happened between July of 2008 and June of 2010. But what no one could have predicted at this point is that the reign of Gaddafi in Libya was about to come to an end. Just half a year after the release of Goldie, protests started to erupt in Libya. Eventually, a civil war broke out, and the Gaddafis were ousted from power. It ended the 42-year-long rule of Muammar Gaddafi, a time period with dozens of fascinating stories. My creator friend RealLifeLore has recently made a dedicated episode about Gaddafi, telling the crazy stories of his reign and of his eventual downfall. And I can truly recommend this episode and the entire series Mad Kings that it is a part of. His documentary series covers the most insane and eccentric rulers, dictators, and kings of the modern era, from Gaddafi to the North Korean leaders, and even an entire episode about Uday Hussein. Now, this series is exclusive to Nebula, which is a streaming service where me and a bunch of other creators get to make videos with full creative freedom. To give you an example, this story you just watched about the feud between Libya and Switzerland did not include significant violence, so it was perfectly suited for YouTube. But certain subject matters, such as the topics discussed in Mad Kings, would just not work on this platform, because these videos would be demonetized. It's also why I created my own Nebula original series, Underexposure, and in it I often discuss darker subject matters. For example, one of my most watched videos there is an episode where I mapped out what exactly happened during the raid on the Bin Laden compound in 2011. And besides that, since Nebula is a subscription service, it also means that we creators get to make more elaborate projects. And of course, it's completely free of any ads. So if you want to check out what I think are some of the most innovative and creative projects on the internet right now, then go to nebula.tv/neo. And if you use exactly this link, you're not only supporting my show, but you're also getting the best deal on Nebula, 50% of an annual subscription, which translates to $30 a year. And thank you so much for watching this video.